So very, very briefly, okay, so when it comes to slavery, the general narrative is the rest of the world was living, hugging unicorns, kumbaya, everybody giving group hugs, playing with puppies in their safe rooms, while the evil white Western European Christians were out there enslaving the world and colonizing and doing all these bad things, therefore give us welfare. Because, white guilt is a very mineable resource on the planet, sadly, because whites suffer from a kind of pathological altruism that means I will sell you my own children in order to avoid being called racist. So the actual history is quite different. It's really three things to remember about Western slavery. Number one, it was about the shortest period of slavery in any culture throughout history. Slavery was indigenous to African and Arab countries before it made its way to Europe. Slavery was widely practiced by the American Indians long before Columbus came to the New World. Ethiopia had slavery until, yes, 1942. Saudi Arabia until 1962. Peru until 68. India until 76. And Mauritania until 1980. So it was not very long. The big peak of Christian slavery, 1519, 1815, that was sort of the peak period. There have, however, been 14 centuries of Arabic or Muslim slavery. And it's hard to know exactly because the records were mostly castrated and killed, but it was about 150 million African people, about 50 million from other parts of the world, vastly exceeding anything.
Yeah, I forgot. The Muslim slavery, they cut the penis and genitals off the men.
Yeah, why are there no blacks? If blacks took if the Middle Easterners took 150 million black Africans, why are there so few blacks in the Middle East? Well, because 80 to 90% of them died en route, and those who remained were castrated, and if they managed to escape that and have children with a local, the child was killed. So there was massive genocide of the slaves in the Muslim countries. Now, of course, all cultures have bad stuff in their history. The question is, Alex, what is the Muslims' current view of that history? Are they looking back and saying, like the Europeans do, wow, we did some bad stuff? That's
no,
really
look at what ISIS did in Libya, targeting blacks. They believe they're subhuman.
Right. And so and where are the Africans going to the Islamic countries demanding reparations, demanding preferential treatment, demanding massive resource transfers to them for the history of slavery? Because I don't think the Muslims feel a huge amount of guilt, at least according to what I've read. And I'm sure some individuals do, but there's not that same navel-gazing, looking in the mirror saying, ooh, me bad.
Well, the left
me bad,
also spins it, when I brought this up in college, to throw this in, and says it was different slavery in the Middle East and Africa. It was loving, like family. No, it's what you see with women chained up in houses with hoods on their heads. It's beyond what happened in most Western plantations, which I'm not defending. I'm just sick of, like, the abject sex slavery, white slavery of the Arabs is legendary.
Well, and so, number one, the Christians practiced slavery for the shortest amount of time. Number two, the Christians generally treated their slaves the best. But number three, which is also not insignificant, Christians ended slavery all around the world. I mean, that they fought, they bled, they died.
The British invaded a bunch of countries, took thousands of ships, you name it, would blow your ship up if you had slaves.
And bribed people to give up their slaves. So, there's that old saying that no good deed goes unpunished. If you want to look generally at the best culture throughout history, you've got to put on this weird inverse lens. You've got to look at things kind of upside down. The culture that is criticized in the modern world is almost always the culture that has done the most good. And the ending of slavery after untold tens of thousands of years of its practice among humanity was, if not the most, one of the greatest moral triumphs in history. And now the only culture, the only race, the only religion that is demonized for slavery is that exact same religion that ended it, creating the greatest moral crusade that the world has ever benefited from and bringing untold wealth and liberty to human beings around the world. So it is completely ridiculous to say, well, white people ought to feel bad for slavery. It's like they're the only people who ended it. And by the way, for liberals that are brainwashed, their own cultures, but around the world.
Well, for liberals that are brainwashed and just tuned in and can't believe this, this is mainline history. This is not what you're saying is in mainline history books.
Well, and Europe, why were there castles in Europe? Everyone thinks it's because of internecine European warfare. No, that was the 20th century. But there were castles because of Muslim slave raiders. Entire tracts of Europe, especially around the coasts, had to be abandoned. And in the coast of Spain and Italy was abandoned because of Islamic raiders who were taking upwards of 1 million Europeans into slavery. Parts of Spain and Italy were abandoned on the coast until the 19th century. It is that recent, and it is that, to that degree.
Let's go further. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, had to launch a giant naval flotilla over 2 years just to be able to get any goods into the Mediterranean. and into other areas there in the Indian Ocean. I mean, no one even knows this, that up until the 1900s in the Pacific and around Indonesia and places, Western governments had to pay bounties to the boobies and the pirates. Boobies aren't breasts, folks. It means booby trap, pirate, Muslim pirates. There were sultans everywhere. You had to pay until the 19th century.
Right. So this idea that there's some kind of compatibility between Islamic culture and modern Western culture is completely insane. There is in Sharia law virtually no separation between church and state. Of course, the separation of church and state was one of the great gifts after a century of bloody religious warfare that the Protestant Reformation gave to Western Europe, which was say, okay, we've got a government. The government is focused upon the prevention, ideally, of criminality and punishment of criminals and so on. But it is not a mechanism by which you can hijack it to impose your religious views on others. That was a separation of church and state. And I would argue that that gave a great deal of flourishing to intellectual achievement, particularly sort of post-Renaissance and into the Enlightenment, where the battle of ideas was foundational to the development of the Republic, of a limited government, of free market capitalism, and of the rights of women. This idea put forward by Milton in an article called Areopagitica, that the best way that you get rid of bad ideas is to give them maximum exposure. If you want to see where the roaches are, turn the light on. And so the idea that we should have a vigorous public debate, that all ideas should be able to fight their way into the battleground of human ideas, a uniquely Western concept, does not really exist anywhere in the Middle East.
And is now under attack simultaneously with them supporting it, the Islamicists, ending free speech all over Europe at universities and here. And it's Muslim groups in the UK driving to have Donald Trump banned from entering the UK. He says, fine, I won't invest anymore of the $700 million I was planning in golf courses. And they call him a terrorist. They say, give us your money, but you're not allowed to be here. You don't have free speech.